Nobody from my family came to my housewarming dinner after I bought my first home. The next morning, Mom texted asking for $5,700 for my brother's rent. I sent $1. 2 weeks later, Dad parked a moving truck in my driveway and said, "Open the door." My name is Owen. I am 31 years old. I work as a supply chain analyst for a mid-sized logistics company headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. I have been there 6 years. I make $74,000 a year, which I know is more than either of my parents ever made, because my mother told me every April when she filed taxes on TurboTax and called me to walk her through the part she did not understand. Supply chain analysis is, at its core, the study of failure. You learn to ask where a system breaks. Which handoff is the one nobody audits? Where the gap is between what the process says should happen and what actually happens on the floor at 2 in the morning when no manager is watching. I am good at it. I got good at it young because I had a family that gave me a lot of material to practice on. I grew up in Gahanna, Ohio. My dad worked construction most of his career, site management in his later years. My mom, Patricia, worked part-time at a school cafeteria for 11 years and then stopped when her back started giving her trouble. They raised 2 sons in a 3-bedroom house on a street where everyone knew everyone, and financial trouble was the kind of thing you mentioned only in lowered voices. My brother Ricky is 28, 3 years younger than me. He is funny and loud and has more natural charm in a Tuesday afternoon than I will carry in my whole life. He has also, at various points, worked as a warehouse picker, a pizza delivery driver, a landscaper, a sales associate at 2 different electronics stores, a dog walker, and an overnight shift at a gas station outside of Reynoldsburg. Never for very long. Never at the same place twice. My parents did not see a pattern in that. They saw a young man still finding his way. I saw a single point of failure that the whole family kept routing around instead of addressing. When I was 22, my parents asked me to co-sign a car loan for Ricky because his credit was too thin. I said no. My dad called that selfish. 3 months later, the car Ricky bought without my signature was repossessed, and my parents made the payoff because the alternative was worse. I did not say anything about that. When I was 24, I started building something. 7 years of specific decisions. I cooked at home instead of restaurants. I drove the same car I had driven in college until it had 190,000 miles on it. I turned down 2 different vacation invitations from work friends because the math did not work yet. I put money in a savings account and I did not touch it. Not when my mom called about the gas bill. Not when Ricky needed a deposit. Not once. And I did not buy my house through my own name. Delia Marsh is 54 years old. She is my work mentor, has been since my 2nd year at the company, and she is the most methodical person I have ever spent time around. She built her own supply chain consulting firm 12 years ago out of a home office and a laptop she bought refurbished. She now has 7 employees, 2 offices, and a client list she guards like a classified document. 8 months before I bought the house, we were in the break room at work, and I told her I was thinking about buying a place. She put down her coffee, and she asked me one question. She did not ask about square footage. She did not ask about the market. She did not ask about my credit score. She said, "Is there anyone in your life who might try to access whatever you own?" I did not have to think long. We set up Westfield Property LLC that same month. Delia became the registered agent because she knew exactly what that meant, having done it before, for 2 other people she did not name. The LLC bought the house. I am the sole member. My personal name does not appear in any public record in a way that gives a family member a legal claim based on relationship alone. Delia said, "When we sign the operating agreement, you build the house into the system correctly before you need the system to hold. Not after." I filed the LLC paperwork on a Wednesday afternoon in January. I bought the house in August. I sent out housewarming invitations in September. The invitations were handwritten. I used cardstock with a simple border. I wrote 14 names. My parents: Ricky, 4 cousins on my dad's side, Terrell and his wife Brenda, and 2 I was still in regular contact with: my Aunt Gloria and her husband Frank. 2 colleagues from work, Phil Okafor and Andrea Castillo, who had covered for me twice during hard weeks and never made a thing of it. Delia, and 2 neighbors I had met in the first month, Harriet Bowman, who had lived on that street for 22 years and brought me a plate of cookies when I moved in, and a man named Soto, who worked nights and had helped me carry in my couch on moving day without being asked. I mailed the invitations 3 weeks before the dinner. The ones for family went to addresses I knew by memory. The dinner was set for a Saturday in late September. I made a brisket that took 9 hours. I roasted potatoes and made green beans with garlic. I bought 2 cases of drinks and a sheet cake from a bakery on Morse Road with Welcome Home written on it, because everything else I thought of felt like too much. I cleaned the house for 4 hours the morning of. I set the table with the good plates I had bought specifically because I was tired of eating off the same 4 mismatched ones from college. I put out napkins. I lit 2 candles in the kitchen. At 6:00, I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the driveway. By 7:30, I knew the family was not coming. Delia arrived at 6:15 with a bottle of wine and a dish towel she had embroidered herself with my house number on it. Phil and Andrea came together at 6:30. Phil with a 6-pack and Andrea with a succulent in a terracotta pot and a card signed by 3 people from our department. Harriet knocked at 6:45 with her husband Martin, a retired civil engineer who shook my hand with both of his. Soto showed up at 7:00 with a card and told me he could only stay an hour before his shift, and he stayed an hour and 15 minutes. Not one member of my family walked through that door. Not my parents. Not Ricky. Not my cousins. Not my Aunt Gloria, who had stood outside the auditorium at my college graduation and told me she was proud in a way I had held on to for 7 years. We had dinner. It was a good dinner. The brisket was right. The conversation was easy. Martin told a story about a bridge he had helped design in the 1980s that turned out to have a miscalculation that no one caught for 6 years. Soto left at 8 and shook my hand on the way out. Delia poured a second glass of wine and told Phil he was wrong about the bangles, and Phil said she did not know what she was talking about, and Andrea told them both to grow up. Harriet laughed until her eyes watered. It was a good night. I want to say that clearly and mean it. But the next morning when I came downstairs, there were 14 paper plates stacked on the kitchen counter and 14 plastic cups next to them. Untouched, I counted them both without meaning to, the way I count things automatically. 14 plates. 14 cups. I moved them to the cabinet. Then I stood at the counter for a moment. I picked up a notepad and I wrote down the date and the names of the people who had attended. Not for any dramatic reason. I write things down. I always have. It is how I understand what happened. My mother's text arrived at 7:42 the following morning. I know the exact time because I was at the counter with my coffee when the phone lit up, and I looked at the time before I looked at the message. A habit from work. Timestamp everything. The text said, "Owen, we need help with Ricky's deposit on the new apartment. $5,700. Can you Venmo it today? We're on a deadline." No greeting. No mention of the previous evening. No acknowledgement that the night before had existed. I set the phone face down on the counter. I stood at the kitchen window. There was a bird on the fence post in the backyard. Small and gray, the kind that does not have a dramatic name. It stayed there for almost 2 minutes, completely and then it lifted off and was gone. I stood there looking at the empty post for a moment after. Then I picked up my phone and sent $1 through Venmo. I did not add a note. 4 minutes later, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 8:15. I let it go. My dad called at 9:03. His voicemail was 41 seconds long. I played it once. He said I was being childish. He said the math was obvious, that I had just bought a house, and Ricky needed a real place to live, and the family expected better. He said I always had more than I needed, and I knew it. I played that last sentence again. More than I needed. I wrote it on the notepad on the counter. Not because I was going to do anything with it right then. Because in supply chain work, when someone tells you how they understand the system, they are telling you how they make decisions inside it. That sentence told me exactly how my dad understood what I owned. It belonged, in his framework, at least partly to the family. Ownership was a communal idea when the thing being owned was mine. Understanding that was not a reason to be furious. It was a reason to be precise. I went to work Monday, processed 3 escalation reports, had a 10 o'clock about a distribution bottleneck in the Midwest network that had been dragging on for 6 weeks, ate a sandwich at my desk at noon, called Delia on my afternoon break and told her about the housewarming and the text and the $1. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Clear." She said, "Good. Keep that." The calls continued for 7 days. My mother tried different angles on different days, and I want to describe them because they were not random. She was working through a list of arguments the same way a salesperson works through objections, looking for the one that gets a yes. Day 2 was guilt. "You did not even reach out to check on us. We haven't heard from you in weeks." This was technically accurate. I had not called in about 10 days before the housewarming. Day 3 was logic. Ricky is so close to getting stable. This apartment is a real chance. He has a job lead. The job lead was at a warehouse across town. It was the same category of job lead Ricky had had 6 times before. Day 4, she told me she had spoken to my Aunt Gloria, and that Gloria agreed I was being selfish. I called my Aunt Gloria that evening. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Did you tell Mom I was being selfish?" A pause. Then, "Owen, your mother told me you had refused to help Ricky at all, and that you had been cutting yourself off from the family." She did not mention a housewarming dinner. I told her everything. The invitations mailed 3 weeks in advance. The 14 plates on the counter. The text that arrived at 7:42 the morning after the empty table. The $1. A longer pause. My Aunt Gloria said, "I did not know about the dinner. I should have called you myself before I said anything to your mother. I am sorry I didn't." She was the first person in my family to say anything that resembled an apology. I thanked her. I told her I was working through it. I would call her soon. That night I took the guest list from the kitchen drawer, and I looked at the 4 family names. I drew a single straight line through each one, not jagged. Clean. I put the list back in its folder and put the folder in the drawer. I did not know yet that folder would be read aloud in my driveway in front of a sheriff's deputy, but I kept it, the way I keep everything. My dad came to my house on a Thursday, 9 days after the housewarming. No call. He knocked once with the hard knock. I opened the door. He was in the blue jacket. He looked past me into the house for a moment, the way a man looks at a space he is calculating, and then he looked at me. He said, "You didn't even tell us you were buying until it was done. What does that say about you?" I stepped back and said, "Come in." He came in. He walked through the living room slowly. He looked at the kitchen. He did not say it was a nice house. He did not ask anything about the neighborhood or the mortgage or any of the things people normally ask. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table without being invited and sat down and put both hands flat on the table surface. He laid it out like a logistics plan. He said he had been talking to some people. His understanding was that a son who bought a 3-bedroom home and lived alone had a responsibility to his family when family needed help. That it was not complicated. That Ricky had found an apartment he liked, but the deposit was too much right now. That the simplest answer was for Ricky to stay with me a few months until he got his feet under him. I said, "How long is a few months?" He said, 3, maybe 6. Until he gets squared away. I said, "I'll think about it." He looked at me with the look that meant he heard stalling where I meant genuine consideration. He said, "Don't take too long. Blood doesn't owe you privacy, Owen." He left. I heard his car start and pull out. I stood at the kitchen counter. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the LLC operating agreement. I read the registered agent section twice. I called Delia. She said, "Tell me." I did. She said 3 to 6 months. I said, "That's what he said." She was quiet for about 4 seconds. Then she said, "Owen, there is a truck coming. I don't know when, but there is a truck coming, and I want you to have a plan before it gets there, not after." We talked for 45 minutes. By the time I hung up, we had a plan. My cousin Terrell called me the following Monday from his car on his lunch break. He calls from his car when he does not want Brenda to hear the conversation, which means he is worried about what he is about to say. He said, "I need to tell you something your dad said at my house last night." I said, "Tell me." He said my father had come to dinner and spent most of an hour explaining his position to Terrell and Brenda. The position was that Owen had been given opportunities the family made possible, that Owen had benefited from sacrifice the family made during his childhood, and that Owen was now comfortable and choosing not to extend that comfort to his brother. That this was a moral failing, and the family expected better from him. My dad had also told Terrell, specifically, that he was planning to help Ricky move into my house, that it was the practical solution, that I had 3 bedrooms and lived alone, that the family had decided this was the right call. Terrell said my father talked about it like the decision was already made, like it was a logistics problem with a solution he had already filed. I told him I would think about it. Terrell said, he is not hearing that as a maybe. He is hearing it as a yes that hasn't been said out loud yet. I said, I know. A pause. He said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "Nothing yet. I am going to let him do what he is going to do, and I am going to be ready when it happens." Terrell said, "You already know what's coming, don't you?" I said, "I think so." He said, "All right, call me after." Then he added, quieter, "I told him you had invited your family to your house, and nobody came." He said it wasn't a real dinner, it was you showing off. I want you to know I told him that was not the right thing to say. I said, "Thank you, Terrell." He said, "It was your house." I want to stop here for a moment, because I think this is the part that some of you understand without me having to explain it. The part where you are sitting with information about what is coming, and you cannot stop it from arriving. You can only be ready. I spent about 4 days in that space. I knew a truck was coming. I knew what my dad thought he was doing and why he thought it was right. I knew about Delia and the LLC and the registered agent documentation. I had the plan. But knowing the plan and sitting with the weight of what it means when a parent has decided your life is available to be reorganized by him, those are 2 different things. They can both be true at the same time. The plan was solid. The weight was real. I sat at the kitchen table one evening with a glass of water, not wine, just water, and I thought about my dad at my college graduation. He had stood outside the auditorium in the sun and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I am proud of you." He had meant it. I had not been wrong about that. He meant it then. People can mean something and also be wrong about you. That is not a contradiction. It is just the whole truth. Stay with me. The truck is coming, and what happened when it pulled up is not what anyone in that driveway expected. Subscribe so you are there when it arrives. The truck came on a Tuesday morning. I had gotten up at 6:30, made coffee. I was halfway through a work email when I heard tires on my driveway. I looked up from my laptop and out the front window, and I saw the Penske pulling in. 26-footer. Gold and green. My dad's car came in behind it. Then a pickup belonging to Walt Denning, an old friend of my dad's, who had worked the same sites for 20 years. My dad got out first. Ricky climbed down from the truck cab. Walt and a man named Dennis got out of the pickup. 4 people total. My mother sat in my dad's car. She did not open her door. I watched from the window for a moment. Then I went to the front door and opened it. My dad walked up the path in the blue jacket. His face had the settled look of a man who had made a decision days ago and was now just completing the steps. He said, "We need to talk. Open the door all the way. Ricky's got some boxes." I said, "Give me a minute." He said, "Owen." I said, "1 minute." I went to the kitchen. I called Delia. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Moving truck. 4 people. Mom in the car. Penske 26-footer. She said, "I am leaving my office right now. Do not open the door more than it is open. Do not let anyone into the house. Do not argue. Do not explain the LLC. Just say someone is coming. I will be there in 22 minutes. I said, "Okay," she said. "Owen, you're fine. I have the folder. Just hold." I went back to the front door. I said, "Someone is on the way. Connected to the property. I need 20 minutes. My dad said, "This is family business. We don't need outsiders." I said, "She is not an outsider. Please wait." He stared at me. That phrase, "connected to the property," had no framework in his mind. He could hear it did not mean what he wanted it to mean, but he could not place it yet. He crossed his arms and stepped. Ricky had finished the sandwich. He was standing by the truck with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the house with an expression that was not quite guilt and not quite nothing. Something in between that I recognized. He knew, somewhere, that this was not entirely right. He came anyway because my dad had said it was fine, and Ricky had always moved in the direction my dad pointed. Walt sat on the truck bumper. Dennis leaned against the pickup. My mother stayed in the car. I went back inside and stood at the kitchen counter. I drank the rest of my cold coffee. I looked at the notepad on the counter with the date and the 14 names. Then I waited. Delia arrived in 19 minutes. She drove her white Camry and parked at the curb, not in the driveway. She got out with one folder under her arm. She walked up the front path at a normal pace. She did not look at the truck. She walked directly to my dad. She introduced herself, first and last name, and said she was the registered agent for Westfield Property LLC, and that she was present in that capacity. My dad said, "What?" She said it again, breaking it into pieces. "This property is owned by Westfield Property LLC. Owen is the sole member of that LLC. I am the registered agent. No person may move into or establish residency in a property owned by an LLC without the written consent of the LLC's authorized representative." My dad's face moved through 3 things in quick order. Confusion, then irritation, then the particular expression of a man who has just realized the ground under him is not what he mapped. He said, "Owen bought this house. His name is on it." Delia said, "Would you like to see the recorded deed?" She opened the folder and held up the deed with both hands, facing out. Walt leaned forward from the truck bumper and read it. He read the whole first page. Then he straightened up and looked at my dad with an expression that was not quite confusion and not quite anything else either. My dad said, "You set this up to keep us out of your life." I said, "I set it up 8 months before any of this, before the housewarming, before the $5,700 text, before you came to my door with a plan for my brother's room." He said, "What is that supposed to mean?" I said, "It means this is how I bought a house. That is the whole thing." His voice went up. He said, "You are our son. You grew up in our house. Blood doesn't owe you privacy. We are family, and you are standing there like we are strangers trying to rob you." Delia said, "Mr. Price, this is a legal matter now. If boxes come off that truck and onto this property without written consent from the LLC, that is unlawful entry. I am going to ask you to hold where you are while I make one call." My dad looked at her. He looked at me. Then he said the sentence. He said, "We just thought you'd want to help your brother get started. That's what families do. You always had more than you needed anyway." I had written that sentence down 6 weeks earlier. I had known it was coming. I still felt it land. not like a wound. Like the final piece of a puzzle, confirming the shape you already knew was there. I said, I know you believe that, Dad, nothing else. Delia reached into the folder. She pulled out the guest list, the cardstock with 14 names and 4 straight lines drawn through the family ones. She said, there is one more thing I want documented in front of witnesses. She held it up so my dad and Walt and Dennis could see it. She said, on September 14th, Owen hosted a housewarming dinner at this address. He mailed invitations to 14 people, including 4 members of his immediate family. None of the family members attended. The following morning, at 7:42 a.m., a text message arrived at Owen's phone requesting $5,700. We have that text. We have this list. Both are part of a documented file. Walt looked at the list. He looked at my dad. He looked at the truck. He said, quietly, Earl, you didn't go to the boys' housewarming? My dad said, that is not the point. Walt said, seems like it kind of is. Nobody said anything. Delia made the call. She called the non-emergency sheriff's line from the driveway in a normal voice in front of everyone. She explained the situation. A moving truck at an LLC held property. The registered agent present and denying consent. Items had not yet been removed from the truck, but the intent was clear. She was requesting a deputy to confirm the legal status. She gave the address. She thanked the dispatcher. She put her phone in her coat pocket. My dad said, you called the police on your own family. I said, I asked a deputy to confirm what the deed says. Those are different things. My mother had finally gotten out of the car. She was standing by the passenger door, arms at her sides, not moving toward us. Just watching. The deputy arrived in 14 minutes. He was in his early 30s, calm, with a notebook and no particular urgency in his expression. He talked to Delia first. She showed him the deed, the LLC certificate, and the registered agent documentation. He read each one. He wrote something down. Then he walked to my dad. He said, Sir, this property is held by an LLC, not by an individual. The registered agent is present and has stated there is no written consent for anyone to move items into or take up residence here. If you attempt to do so without that written consent, that constitutes unlawful entry. I need you to understand that clearly. My dad looked at the deputy. He looked at the house. He looked at the truck. He walked to the truck. He picked up a cardboard box from the open lift gate. The box had Ricky written on it in black marker. He stood there holding it. Then he set it back down. He set it back down on the lift gate, rested his hand on it for a moment, and then he walked to his car and got in without looking at me. I watched him sit there behind the wheel. Ricky came over to me with his hands in his jacket pockets. He looked at the house. Then he looked at me. He said, Owen, man, come on. I said, Ricky, I want you to have a stable place to live. I mean that for real. But you cannot move into my house without asking me first. You did not ask me. Nobody asked me. There is a real difference between asking and pulling up with a Penske. He looked at his feet. He said, Dad said you'd come around. He said you always do, eventually. I said, I know he thought that. Ricky got back in the truck. Walt came over before he left. He is 60 years old and built like a man who has been carrying weight his whole life. He stood in front of me for a moment and did not say anything right away. Then he said, Your dad is my friend for 25 years, but what he tried to do here today was not right. I said, I know. He said, for what it's worth. He got in his pickup. The truck left first. Dennis followed in the pickup. My dad's car sat in the driveway for 6 minutes, engine off. I could see my mother in the passenger seat looking at her phone. Then my dad backed out. He did not look at the house as he went. The driveway was empty. Delia stood next to me. She said, You okay? I said, Yeah. She said, You sure? I said, No, but I'm okay. She said, That is the honest answer. She handed me the folder with the deed and the guest list and the LLC paperwork and she went to her car. I went inside. My coffee was cold again. The secondary fallout came in about 72 hours, which is fast for a family that processes slowly. My dad told his version to my Aunt Gloria that same evening. In his version, I had used corporate paperwork to keep my own family out of my home. I had chosen a stranger with legal documents over blood. He did not recognize who I had become. My Aunt Gloria called me. I told her the accurate version, the LLC, what a registered agent is and why it matters. Delia, the deputy, the box my dad had picked up and put back down. She listened to all of it without interrupting once. Then she said, Earl did not go to your housewarming, and then he drove a moving truck to your door and expected you to open it. I said yes. She was quiet. She said, Owen, your father does not see what he does. He has never seen it. I have watched this for 35 years, and I don't know how to explain it except to say that he genuinely believes he is the one being wronged in this. She was quiet again. Then, I am sorry I wasn't at the dinner. I let your mother's version sit in my head too long, and I owe you better than that. I said, it means a lot that you said that. My Aunt Gloria made calls after we hung up. Not to yell at anyone, to tell the accurate version to the people who had been given the inaccurate one. She told Terrell. She told 2 other cousins. She told 2 people at her church, who my father had spoken to directly. The narrative my dad had been building for months, the one where I had more than I needed and owed the family a return on some debt I had never agreed to, that narrative ran into the facts and stopped cold. The facts were simple. I had mailed invitations. Nobody from the family came. At 7:42 the next morning, a request for $5,700 arrived. When my answer was $1, a moving truck showed up. Terrell called me 2 days later. He said, Dad stopped the speech. I said, what speech? He said, the one about what you owe. He was giving it everywhere. Gloria's house. My house. Walt's house, apparently. A pause. Walt told him to stop. I said, Walt? Walt told him you had invited your family to your house, and they didn't come, and then showed up with a truck. And that was not a debt Owen ran up. That was a choice Earl made. Walt, a man I had maybe had 3 real conversations with in the last decade. I said, how did my dad take that? Terrell said, quiet. He went very quiet. My mother texted me the following week. She said she was sorry if things got out of hand. She said she hoped I was taking care of myself. She did not say what, specifically, she was sorry for. She did not mention the moving truck or the housewarming or the $5,700 or the $1. I texted back, I hope things settle down for you. Take care of yourself. I meant it. I also did not call. It has been 7 months. I still live in the house. The LLC still owns it. Delia is still the registered agent. The deed still says what it says. I turned the 3rd bedroom into an office. I bought a proper desk, the kind I had looked at in a store window at 26, and thought someday. There is a bookshelf on the east wall, and a lamp that is good enough to read under. In the evenings when work is done, I sit in there, and I read or I look out at the backyard. My Aunt Gloria came to dinner in March. She brought Frank in a bottle from a Finger Lakes vineyard she likes. I made the same brisket. We sat at the kitchen table for almost 3 hours. Frank told a story about a camping trip in 1987 that went completely wrong in a way that was, in retrospect, entirely avoidable. Gloria laughed until she had to put her glass down. That was the dinner I had planned in September. It just needed more time to arrive. Terrell came in January with Brenda and their 2 kids. His daughter is 7, and she found the kitchen counter and started drawing on a paper plate with a marker from her backpack. His son is 4, and fell asleep on my couch about 12 minutes after they arrived. It was the noisiest that house had been since I moved in. I stood in the kitchen doorway and thought about the 14 paper plates I had moved to the cabinet. Phil and Andrea have been over twice for football. Harriet waves every morning when she walks her dog past my house, and I wave back from the porch. Soto came over last month to borrow a drill, and we ended up talking for an hour about nothing in particular, the way neighbors do when there is no agenda. My dad has not contacted me. I do not spend time wondering about it. He is in the same house I grew up in. I hope he is okay. I do not expect the phone to ring. Ricky found a room in a shared house 3 miles away through someone he knew from a short stint at a warehouse. My Aunt Gloria checks on him sometimes. He has not called me. I think he is embarrassed more than angry, and those are different things, and one of them might eventually lead somewhere. The guest list is in the kitchen drawer, not thrown out. Filed. The folder with the deed, the LLC certificate, and the cardstock with 14 names and 4 straight lines through the family ones sits in the kitchen drawer between the takeout menus and the flashlight I bought when I moved in. I took it out once, about a month after the driveway. I looked at the 4 crossed-off names for about a minute, then I put it back. It is not a wound I am keeping. It is a document. And documents are how I understand what happened. Here is what I learned. I want to say it plainly. There are people in your life who will look at what you have built and calculate what they are owed from it. They will do this with complete sincerity. They are not lying when they say you have more than you need. They believe it. They have believed it for so long that the belief feels like math. The belief is the problem, not the dishonesty. You cannot argue someone out of a belief that is working for them. What you can do is build the thing right before you need it to be right. Set up the structure. Know who your registered agent is. Keep the paperwork in a folder with a rubber band on it. Document the invitations you sent. Save the text that arrived the morning after, not because you are planning a war. Because a calm person with the right folder is never the easy target anyone thought they were. The truck left. The driveway was empty. My coffee was cold on the counter when I went back inside. I made a fresh pot. I drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking at the fence post where that bird had been 2 weeks earlier, the morning the text arrived. Nothing was there now. Just the post and the yard and the ordinary Tuesday morning, which was enough. That is the whole thing. 1 guest list, 1 moving truck, and a folder that said exactly what the truth was. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.